Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. Welcome back to Pushing Through Loss. I have a guest with me today who I just met, and I'm really excited to hear your story because of the fact that it brings a whole new light to what infertility looks like and what pregnancy loss looks like and what that space should eventually evolve to become to include. So, Catherine, thank you so much for contacting me and for being willing to share your story.
It's funny you say that because I remember when you first put up your post in the group looking for guests, I was a little anxious, kind of telling you about my story. Because like I said in my post, like sometimes permanent infertility or women or families who have to experience a hysterectomy aren't necessarily included in the infertility community. So I feel really honored to be able to shed light on that topic and really excited to be here today.
Thank you. Well, let's go back to what you just said, because I think that it's a really key factor in terms of understanding that a hysterectomy after you've already had kids is still considered a complete infertility journey. And like you said before we started recording, you call it more of a permanent infertility because of the fact that, yes, you have a child, but you can never get pregnant again. So let's go back to how that happened and tell me a little bit about the process of what you went through.
So after having my second daughter, I suffered an amniotic fluid embolism during labor. And the first phase of that is you go into cardiopulmonary arrest. And then the second phase is you typically go into what's called DIC, which is where your body is bleeding and clotting at the same time. And you are essentially bleeding profusely. And then you typically, or not typically, but some moms go into organ failure. So I had like kidney failure, heart failure, lung failure. I was on a lot of machines for, I was in a coma for a total of 9 days. And unfortunately, at the same time, suffered a stroke and had, I think it was 7 surgeries during those 9 days.
Wow.
So you can just kind of, I mean, even as I'm thinking about it, I'm getting chills just to, it's my experience, my lived experience, but even just kind of hearing myself talk about it, sometimes it's just like, I can't believe our family went through that.
Right.
And like, I'm here talking to you today by the grace of the Lord, saving my life through thousands of medical professionals. And yeah, we're just really grateful. So, but one of the surgeries, the decision was made to do an immediate hysterectomy. Like they didn't even ask my husband, they didn't ask him to consent, they just did it. Because like I said, you're just bleeding like incredible amounts, like from every orifice. Like sometimes the moms bleed from their ears or their eyes, obviously your nose, and it's just an incredibly traumatic experience for all parties involved. And I have a friend who goes to our church who is an OB, and he explained to me that with an AFE, it's typically OBs typically call it the kiss of death because it really truly brings, depending on how severe the reaction to the amniotic fluid is, and it doesn't necessarily only have to be amniotic fluid. It could be a hair cell, a nail cell, meconium. It can be anything in the fluid as well. So it's really kind of this situation that goes to everything is fine and then until it's not, and it's almost always catastrophic. I mean, like, I forget what the new statistic is. I think it's 70 to 90% of women die within that first hour. Like if they wind up dying, it's that first hour. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, we got Kathy through the first hour. I mean, I was in surgery for 6 hours, but we got Kathy through that first hour. And I come out of surgery and the surgeon tells my husband, like, she's stable for now, obviously still very, very, very sick. But, we didn't have to put her on ECMO. And so I initially came out of surgery about about midnight, the night that my AFE happened. And then about 2 or 3 in the morning, they determined that I was still internally bleeding. So I went back to surgery and they try to clean out the blood, clean out the clots. And they unfortunately were not able to stabilize me that time. And that's when I needed to go on the ECMO machine. And I'm not going to try to pronounce it because it's kind of hard, but basically think of it as a machine that supports your heart and lungs. And you can go on either form. VA is the part that works for your lungs. And then I might be messing that up. But anyways, there's two parts, like one for your heart, one for your lungs. Okay. Some people, actually a lot of people with COVID or COPD needed only the lung, but unfortunately I needed both because like I said, my heart and lungs were not working. And so the surgeon comes out of that surgery and explains to my husband what happens. And my husband is an incredibly calm and rational thinking person in crisis. And so he had the forethought to ask, well, last time you said at least we didn't have to put her on ECMO. Now she's on ECMO. What's the next step? And unfortunately, the surgeon said, I'm sorry, that's all we can do for her. It's now up to her and God what the outcome is going to be. And, I wholeheartedly believe I had to fight really, really hard, but ultimately, I'm so grateful that it was in the Lord's plan for me to survive. And my life now is hard. My AFE unfortunately did leave me disabled. And I've been in rehab for 4 years. Currently, I'm doing cardiac and neurological rehab. And yeah, our life is completely different now. But there's so many mercy drops from the Lord. I could tell you thousands that have occurred over the last 4 years. But hysterectomy in particular, not all AFE survivors need a hysterectomy. Thank the Lord. Actually, there was just one, I think it was 2 weeks ago, who had a baby after her AFE. And you can imagine, having been through perinatal trauma yourself, what that scenario is like for that survivor. And while I hold gratitude and joy for that survivor who got to go on to have another baby, in divine tension, I hold grief for myself and my all perinatal trauma survivors who have to have a hysterectomy. And just, to wake up. I remember the first day I woke up. Well, when you're coming out of a coma, like, it's kind of like 51st dates where, they're kind of wake up for a minute and then you go back to sleep and then you don't remember what happened that minute. So my husband said, like, he just had to tell me the story over and over and over. And even when I first woke up, they didn't tell me about the stroke. It was not until I got home that he finally told me about the stroke. He didn't want to overwhelm me too much. But I remember him coming and me kind of waking up and him saying, you have this condition called an amniotic fluid embolism. And I just remember being incredibly confused in that moment because I didn't remember being pregnant. ICU delirium is very real. And partly because of trauma and the way that my body processes trauma in my mind, but also because of the stroke, I had amnesia. And so there's like pretty much a month between August, my daughter's birthday's in September. So between August and September that I don't remember. At least thankfully now I do remember being pregnant, and like some of those memories have started to come back, but even still that month is like just nothing. But like I said, I remember him telling me about this condition, and then the next thing he said was, you had a hysterectomy. And I don't really remember what I thought, what I felt. I think I was just in shock because actually when I woke up I was still intubated. And so
you couldn't even say anything.
I couldn't talk. I have this weird thing in my throat. I feel like I'm choking.
Right.
I couldn't move my arms because they cuffed my arms.
Oh, so you didn't pull it out when you woke up.
Yeah, exactly. And apparently I did. I mean, it's completely understandable. Try to pull this thing out of my mouth. Yes. But I was actually intubated for 3 days. So thankfully I didn't achieve, like, I wasn't successful because obviously I still needed that support. I mean, I had a massive, it's called a hemopneumothorax. And so that's air and blood in your chest. Oof. And so you can just imagine the trauma my lungs and my heart sustained.
Mm-hmm.
And even for multiple years after my AFE, my heart was enlarged because
Wow.
of just the trauma it endured.
Right.
But I do want to talk more about how we were talking before we started recording about like the difference between secondary infertility and permanent infertility.
Sure.
So when I first had my hysterectomy, and I'm obviously searching social media to try and find some support, a lot of people consider women who have a hysterectomy in the secondary infertility group, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. And I respectfully disagree with that,
Mm-hmm.
as secondary infertility is defined as when you have no infertility problems with your first child, so you conceive naturally, and then with your second child, for whatever reason, you're struggling to get pregnant. So that's kind of the textbook definition of secondary infertility.
Mm-hmm.
But in my case, yes, I've had children. I have two little girls. So yes, I have had children, yet I can never have children ever again.
Right.
And there's a lot of feelings surrounding that notion. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, at first I remember asking my husband, like, are you upset about the hysterectomy? And at first he was like, well, no, of course, like it saved your life.
Right.
And yet, but since then, like I said, my daughter just turned 4. So it's kind of like that time that maybe potentially we would be thinking about a third. And more recently, he's shared with me that, yeah, sometimes it does make him sad,
Mm-hmm.
which is completely understandable. And I had to go through the grief process
Mm-hmm.
in losing an organ in my body. Obviously, God allowed it to happen, and it saved my life. I'm so thankful to the surgeon who made that decision for me. Yet it's really hard. Like, I hosted a baby shower a couple weekends ago. Like, I'll never have another baby shower. But just the nuances of like, I'll never have another celebration of bringing a new life
Mm-hmm.
outside, or bringing a new life into this world. And granted, I wholeheartedly believe God can grow our family in other ways. I have AFE sisters who choose to do surrogacy, and then others who choose to do adoption. So, we're hopeful and open. If God decides to grow our family, he will. But at the same time, it's okay to acknowledge, like, it's sad. I can never carry another baby.
Mm-hmm.
And recently I was talking with a friend about it, and she was like, well, God can grow your family through adoption. I actually would like to respectfully, encourage people not to dismiss the grief. Like, it's, if I go to someone and say, well, you're going through infertility, why don't you just adopt? That's
Right.
incredibly insensitive. It's not supporting the person where they are.
Right.
And it
One of the
just,
things that I've found in terms of talking to other women thus far is that everyone tries to offer their suggestions. Everyone wants to be helpful. Everyone wants to say, oh, I have a solution to whatever your infertility problem is, or whatever your grief problem is, or whatever it is
mm,
that you're feeling. I need to feel like I can help. And sometimes that help just comes with sitting and listening,
yeah.
because like you said, it's not helpful for someone else to come up to you and say, well, you could just adopt. Okay, well, let me tell you how expensive adoption is, and it doesn't get rid of the grief that I now no longer am able to carry a child.
Hmm. Absolutely. And even so about a year ago, yeah, it was a little over a year, I did a post about how baby showers are always a celebration, but for some people, maybe attending those baby showers, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I personally have experienced that. The first baby shower I went to after my AFE, it was about a year and a half, 2 years after my AFE. So I had had time to heal,
Mm-hmm.
and I excused myself to the restroom and went and cried in the bathroom, you know, or even last year, right around the time I did that post, um, I cried we were praying, so everyone's eyes were closed so no one could tell I was crying. But I even cried at that baby shower. And there's so much weight to holding an infertility journey, whatever that looks like for the family. There's so much weight and heaviness. And there are going to be things that bring up that grief again, unfortunately. I will say at least those two friends, they allowed me to, talk about my experience at their baby shower and share the pictures. I mean, they were incredibly supportive. And even one of them, when I called her on the phone to ask, I said, hey, I want to do this post about baby showers. Is it okay with you? Like, can I use your picture, etc.? And she said, I actually had the thought when I was walking into my baby shower, because she is obviously close with the friends that were attending and she knew my story. She knew there were other people in the room who were going through infertility. And she was like, yeah, I actually had the thought as I walked into my baby shower, I wonder if this day is hard for certain people. And I was just like, wow, that's incredibly emotionally intelligent of you, just like so compassionate, that while this is a joyous occasion and we're celebrating, for some people, unfortunately, it's just hard.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And it's really special to be able to have a friend who
Yeah,
can think about that. Not everybody does that. And it's not to say
I
that
agree.
you expect everybody to do that, but to have that one person that you know is in your corner and is just thinking of you in that moment means so much.
I absolutely agree. And I got off that phone call just feeling so loved and so supported and seen. It just, when I walk around and, people see me, they see me walking. I mean, sometimes I have to use a cane, sometimes I have to use a walker. But more often than not, I feel well enough not to use those devices, which
Wow.
is incredible. And but yet they don't always see the grief or the hardships that I
Right.
went through, maybe to get my family ready for church or to drive to an appointment.
Right.
It's really, like I said, our life has just been flipped upside down.
Yeah.
And we hold a lot of gratitude, but I'm thankful to have a safe space to process things through.
Yeah, it's definitely something, and we talked about this just very slightly before we started talking on record, that it's so important to have that space. And it's equally important to have the space separate for men and women because they process things, number one, so differently. And
Mm-hmm.
because of the fact that there's something to be said about men having an infertility journey versus women having an infertility journey. Tell me a little bit more because I think that it's really key to touch on your recovery aspect and getting to the point where, yes, you have this grief that always is going to be sort of in your heart in one way, shape, or form. But getting to that point now, a few years later, of saying, I can live with what I have. And not only that, but you've talked a lot about gratitude and how you've found the space to say, okay, I don't have certain things, but I'm choosing to focus on the things that I do have. Tell me what that process was like for you.
I have to tell you, when you ask that question, I have chills when I think about our journey. It's just been obviously the hardest thing I've ever gone through, like
Mm,
hands down. But when I think about our journey and just the ways that the Lord has provided for our family, um, I mean, we have an incredible, incredible church family who, you know, um, I didn't fully, let me back up a second. I didn't fully understand how sick I was. My AFE happened in September. I came home October 18th. So I was in the hospital a full month.
wow.
And
And
then,
was your daughter in the hospital with you, or had she come home with your husband at that point?
yeah. So, unfortunately, I mean, it's fortunate and unfortunate, but she had gone home while I was
Mhm.
still in a coma. And
Wow.
so he brought her home. I mean, and then like I again, like it's that divine tension of gratitude that, my daughter was safe. Cause like I said, I
Right.
had the AFE during labor. And so
Right.
she had to be resuscitated, intubated on oxygen. Um, so immense gratitude that, she was okay. And
Mhm.
the grief of, I you kind of see my then 2 year old kind of looking around like, where's mommy?
Right.
And
And
when
also
my
that loss of not being able to breastfeed if
yeah.
you wanted to.
Yeah, that was actually something else I had to really, really grieve. It was hard. But back to my point of like not fully understanding how sick I was. And it was probably a lot of pride as well. I was young, healthy. I was 34 when my AFE happened. So, in all intents and purposes, healthy. I was a stay-at-home mom. And even for the first year of my daughter's life, I was a nanny. And so I took her to work with me. And so she had not really been with anybody except me, my husband, and her nana. It was just really the three of us who she had been with.
Right.
And I totally forgot my train of so I was talking about how sick I was. So I thought when I got home from the hospital, it would be like 2-3 months of healing, getting stronger, and I would be fine. Right. I really thought by the following January I'd be back to being a full-time stay-at-home mom. And even in that first year after my AFE, I had 4 rehospitalizations from complications.
Wow.
Yeah. So that just kind of gives you the depth of like really what my body went through. And so, like I said, I was really in denial for 6 months. And it was, but at 6 months, I remember I had fluid in my lungs and around my heart. And I remember looking at the cardiologist and asking him, well, why did this happen? He was like, it's from your AFE. And that was kind of the light bulb moment. That was like, wow, yeah, this was really, really severe.
Right.
So I think once I worked through the denial, it was just really white knuckling through for probably at least 3 years of just like putting one foot in front of the other. And there have been so many times, we have just been exhausted. And there's just one way that, the Lord sends someone to just encourage us. And I mean, breastfeeding. So I tried to pump for 2 months, which was completely ridiculous.
I was going to say, especially if you were in the hospital for at least a month, at that point, your body's like, I have no hormones going through me. You've had a hysterectomy. Yeah. Your whole body has been thrown into this turmoil and you're trying to pump and your brain is going, I can do this. And your body's like, what are you doing to me?
Exactly. Yeah. And so I finally came to the decision not to. And I remember I cried for like an hour straight. Literally. Sure. It was devastating. Yet in that devastation, like the Lord provided donors, breast milk donors.
That's amazing.
And we gave our second daughter donated milk for a full year. Like it was just incredible. Like, and again, like every time our stock got low, like the Lord would send someone else. Like we had a woman.
Gives me chills.
It does. Yes. Even we had people ship it from like Indiana or Michigan.
Wow.
And a woman, so my sister lives in Georgia, and a woman had moved from Georgia to Florida near where we live. She donated milk to us. It's just incredible, like the way that the Lord provided. And I kept reiterating to my husband, like, if we have to put her on formula, it will be fine. Like right. Thousands, millions of babies.
She's a fed baby. That's all that matters.
Yes. At the end of the day, that's all that matters. But it was really like God just really provided for us, and we were just incredibly grateful. But yeah, when I think about the last 4 years, like I said, it's probably those first like 3.5 years, it was really literally just putting one foot in front of the other. And I'm sad to say that I've had rehospitalizations or ER visits every year since, which is awful. It's really
to become a pro at going to the hospital.
Yes. I don't like it. I don't like it when, my nurse walks in and is like, oh, I remember you. It's not a fun feeling.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. But even with that, like I was having testing done one day, and the nurse, this was last year, I was having testing done, and the nurse walks in and is explaining the procedure to me. And she walks by my husband, and he works for Wycliffe Bible Translators. And so he was wearing his Wycliffe shirt. And she was like, Wycliffe. And it like clicked in her mind. She was actually the nurse who took care of me right after my AFE on the cardiac floor. And so she
Wow.
starts crying. So she kind of looked at me funny and she was like,
Aw.
were you on GT7? And I was like, yes. And she was like, oh my God, I was your nurse. Like, and she started, like I said, just started
Aw.
crying. And she's just like, oh my goodness, it's so good to see you. You know, so like there again, like there are mercy drops from the Lord to like even
Right.
encourage these medical providers that, you know, the work that they are doing matters and
Right. And
they're
it makes a
getting
difference you're still here.
exactly. And yeah. But again, when I think back and reflect on my journey, it's just been arduous, is the
Mhm.
only way to say it. It reminds me a lot of the story of Job, and I'm
Mhm.
not perfect. There have been times, you know, I've questioned God or been angry or, you know, had to process something with him. But you know, I just think of Job and his faithfulness and
Mhm.
the things that he was going through. Um, I'm encouraged to say I've never, you know, not had my faith by my side. You know, I really think that is truly the reason we're doing as well as we are.
Mhm.
And I get my stubbornness from my dad. Our personalities are very similar. We have the same sense of humor, the same like grit and determination. And yeah, I mean, when I got sick, the doctors were telling my family I'd be in the hospital 6 to 8 months. And my dad was like, nope, not Kathy. Like, and sure
Wow.
enough, you know, it was, I say merely a month, given the fact that a
Right.
month is still a
Given
long
that you could
time.
have been there a lot longer.
Exactly. And, you know, um, I think when as a mom, probably as a mom and a wife, probably the hardest thing to cope with day to day is the impacts it has on my family. You
Mhm.
know, um, a couple of years ago. So I just got my license back last November. So it's just coming up on a
Wow.
year. Yeah, it's really exciting. But previously, it was my second daughter's second birthday. We went
Mhm.
swimming with some friends and we get home, and my then 4-year-old says, Mommy, well, I like Auntie Cynthia. She calls our friend Cynthia Auntie Cynthia. She says, I like Auntie Cynthia better. And I was like, oh, okay, well, why? Why do you feel that way? And she's like, well, because Auntie Cynthia can drive, you know. And
And
yeah,
you're like, oh,
that's an accurate face.
yeah.
Yeah, and I started crying, really upset, and you know, I said to her, you know, my medical team has hope, and I have hope that if it's in God's plan, He will, you know, allow me to drive again. And you know, my 4-year-old probably, or my then she's now 6. She probably doesn't even remember that comment. I should ask her if she does. But it's what a gift it is for me to be able to go to my 6-year-old and say, do you remember this? And if you don't, let me tell you about it. And let me tell you what God did
Right.
in this
And it teaches them
situation.
gratitude also because they can understand not only how far you've come, but how far they've come as well to say, she wanted you to drive so badly that she said that she liked a friend better than you in that moment versus now looking back and saying my mom can drive like it is possible and it did happen.
Yeah. But then too, there was, you know, the notion of working through, you know, if it's not in God's plan for me to drive, we have to accept that and we have
Right.
to move forward.
Right.
I will say though, I'm encouraged this year, like obviously, oh, the the messiness that is my daughter's birthday, obviously a massive celebration, yet I can never change the story that that's the day that was the hardest day of my life.
Right.
Um and it's really hard for me to verbalize that because
Mhm.
for so long I wanted her to have her day, and then in the AFE community we celebrate survivoriversaries again, so I actually picked the day I woke up from a coma as my survivoriversary. So again, like
Mhm.
I was so hard, or I was let me take a second. I was trying so hard to separate
Mhm.
the days. And this year hit a lot differently. I really felt like God was putting it on my heart to accept our story and
Mhm.
accept. I mean, it's easy to accept what he's done, you know, because we're just grateful to be here.
Right.
But I'm also working towards the acceptance of, we're now at over 4 years. What if this is as good as it gets? And I'm working towards it. I will be honest, I've not accepted that. Like I said, I'm very determined. I have a lot of grit and stubbornness, and I don't want this to be it, so to speak. But God in his tender, loving care has, come alongside me and, is working towards accepting, that if this is all it gets, I'm not done fighting. I'm encouraged to give at least one more year. And like I said earlier, it's really challenging the ways my recovery impacts my immediate family, my husband and my girls. My husband in particular, he has to bear a lot. He went from being a full-time working dad to now he's a full-time working dad and a caregiver of a newborn. Yeah. And my caregiver and my then 2-year-old's caregiver. So you can just imagine what his world was like. And granted, at first we had a lot of help. And, obviously as time goes on, naturally, a natural progression, that help, they have to move on, so to speak.
It dissipates in a way. It's not that necessarily they're thinking, oh, they're fine, they don't need my help anymore, but it's like, okay, everybody's resources gets spread thin.
It changes. Yeah. And just this year in particular, my husband has made it known on multiple occasions of like he's ready to move on. And thankfully I got to be honest and tell him, honey, I'm sorry, I'm not ready to move on. I'm not ready to give up yet. And so we're kind of working through. We actually had really a challenging heart to heart with my doctor, my primary care doctor, of like, how do we balance, because we're at the point that I need to be living my life. Like rehab doesn't need to be my entire life, but it's really hard. But I think too, bringing it back to infertility, like, I don't know that you necessarily ever truly move on from permanent infertility. I know it gets easier to hold that grief and hold that divine tension of grief and gratitude. I think with time it does get easier. And who knows, maybe when I hit my 40s, like, entering a new decade, I'm really hopeful it will hit differently. I can't say yet, yes or no. But too, like, everyone is so different. It's okay to still be sad that you needed this procedure to save your life. And it's okay to be sad that, one of the greatest days of your life, the day that your baby was born, is simultaneously the hardest, most awful day of your life.
Yeah.
I'm thankful society is changing, but change is slow and arduous. But yeah, I'm thankful that with the help of social media and more podcasts getting out there, like the only word I can think of is temperature. The temperature of grief and gratitude at the same time is changing.
I think that's a really key point, because when I first went through having a miscarriage, I don't think I ever understood that you could have two completely opposite emotions hold space at the same time. I had been through a lot. My mom had breast cancer when I was I think she was diagnosed when I was 9, and thankfully she survived. She made it through. She's a cancer survivor now, twice actually.
Oh no.
But yeah, so she had cancer again about 11 years ago. It was right before I had my second child, and he just turned 10. So thankfully she's still alive. But it's one of those where even as a kid, I don't know that I ever understood that feeling, that grief of loss and that grief of worrying and the anxiety and the nervousness that comes with it. It's okay to then also be exhilarated and happy about something else. And it's a really interesting concept, especially like you said, the greatest day of your life of welcoming your second child is also the worst day of your life because you almost died. And so to have those two emotions hold space at the same time is so key to understanding that grief is all over the place. It's not linear. It's completely messy. It's something that nobody ever wants to talk about. So we can never actually process the understanding of what comes with it unless you are willing to then say, okay, now I have to sit in that grief. But you don't. If you don't want to sit in that space, it's okay. And that's normal, but you can still feel it.
Yeah, well, and so you said I almost died. I was clinically dead multiple times. I mean, I coded 6 times, and just, for every time, they would get my heart rate back, I would code again. And it just, for what a reason I do not understand, God chose to, get me to the correct hospital to have this machine to act as my heart and lungs. So I could live. It's just incredible. But to your point of that, my counselor calls it divine tension. I used to call it emotional duality, but I think divine tension is such a much more accurate description, because God created all emotions.
Right.
And even I vividly remember this. It was Halloween. We had gone trick-or-treating with our kids. We were driving home. And like I said, I came home on the 18th. So I was home about 2.5 weeks. And that was the first moment that I was like, I started crying. That was literally, since I had woken up, I think that was the first moment I shed a tear.
Wow.
So, wow, I hadn't actually thought about that. So in over a month, I didn't shed a tear. And but yeah, like I said, I remember like being like, wow, this is really, really heavy. So incredibly heavy. It's like, you're trying to carry around an elephant, like just unimaginably heavy. And it was either the next day or a couple days later, my then counselor came over to see me. And I remember telling her about that. And she was like, Kathy, I want to encourage you. It's okay. It's okay to be angry. This happened, and you can process that anger with the Lord. He created anger.
Yep.
And we are so quick to turn it sinful, when we yell at our kids or our husband or lash out. That's when it becomes a sin. But anger in and of itself as the emotion is not a sin.
Right.
That's what I personally believe.
Right.
And I think too often, again, our society doesn't, talk about those negative emotions, grief, anger. And in the infertility world, like, I think too often, even if it's, I personally feel like in the perinatal world, many times people are like, well, it was just only a chemical pregnancy, or it was just only a 10-week miscarriage. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I personally believe like life begins at conception. I mean, there is no, viability factor, in my opinion. Like, I believe if it was a quote unquote only a chemical pregnancy, I mean, those parents are going to go to heaven and meet that baby. It's, I think, again, our society just diminishes what these families are going through and the grief that they're going through. It's just awful. And I'm so encouraged and proud of the women who, I have a sibling who has 3 living children, and she experienced 2 miscarriages. Wow. And she says, I'm a mother of 5. And I'm like, well, yeah, absolutely you are.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm just so proud of those families who choose to still honor those babies and talk about it. It's not easy. I mean, even in my situation, it's not easy talking about permanent infertility.
Right.
And until you had posted in that group and I saw your post, I don't think I had really thought. I always held grief, but I didn't think about the massive loss of future pregnancies. And, I will never be pregnant again. So I thank you for having this space and, shedding light on a topic that society so often wants to, hold in the dark, but you're not. You're pushing it into the light.
Thank you. It really is my honor to be able to work with people who have gone through pregnancy loss and infertility journeys. And I think that, like you said, the more we talk about it, the easier it becomes to make it more accessible. And it's not something that I want to say you should live in your grief, you should live in your sorrow, you should wallow and just not do anything. No, the point of this podcast is to be able to talk about it. And like you so very clearly emulated, to have that not only survival afterwards, but thriving in terms of finding what you have versus sitting in what you don't have. And it really is my honor to be able to host a space like this. So I thank you for coming on and being able to share.
So often people reach out to me and say, you're doing amazing things. Like, I'm so thankful for you. And I don't know, I'm thankful to be able to do it.
Mm,
Yet it's truly a gift to me to be able to have the space for people to verbalize what they're going through. And like you
yeah,
said, I think the more we talk about it, the more normal it will become that, these families don't have to suffer on their own.
right.
Like, there's support and hope out there.
Yep. Yep. If you could have one parting message for anybody listening, what would that be?
Oh, that's a great question. One parting message. Oh, I feel like there's like 10 I want to say. One parting message, mm, I would say what you're feeling is valid. It's completely understandable, whatever you're feeling. The hope is that there are people out there who want to come alongside you so you don't have to stay stuck there.
Mhm.
And it's almost a gift if you allow someone into that sacred space.
It is.
It's
And it's,
typically a gift to the other person as well.
yeah, one of the things I've realized through this whole journey is that people want to help. And so for you to allow them into that space, you're not doing yourself a favor, you're actually helping them also.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for that. If people want to find you, where can they reach out?
So I have a website. It's www.birthtraumastories.com. I'm also on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Birth Trauma Stories
Perfect.
on
We'll
all
include that
three.
all in the show notes. So
Great.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Your story is incredible. And I'm so grateful you're still here to share it. And I'm grateful that whatever God's plan is for you, to be able to get the message out that everyone really needs to hold space for infertility and for pregnancy loss. And whatever that space feels comfortable for each person is what's right.
Yes. Amen. Thank you so much for your space as well. Like, I
Thank you.
feel incredibly honored to share my story.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community for those who've experienced pregnancy loss. Remember, you are not alone in your journey, and there is strength within you to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's episode, please consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.